We tend to think of Japan as very in-group, out-group, but Buddhism is so open, very much in tune with nature and seasons, which I really liked. When you come here and you're looking for a Zen center or a place to meditate, and I couldn't even really find one. The temples here are very different. They cater to their members. There's often not a lot of meditation going on. I find Japanese people to be deeply spiritual, but they don't claim to be religious.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Gretchen.
Hi.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You're running the Dairyuji temple in the Oga Peninsula, all the way north in Akita. And you came to visit us here in Osaka today to talk about your work running the temple, but also the mindfulness meditation retreats you organize there, and also your work as a grief educator here in Japan, which is kind of very niche, and I'm very curious about that too. But I want to know first, as usual, what brings you to Japan? How did you end up here?
Right. Well, like many people, I did come as an English teacher on the JET program. So I was in ALT in Akita Prefecture. And I only stayed for 1 year, but within that year, I met my future husband. So I went back to America and I lived in Colorado for a few years, but we ended up getting married. And then I came back with him a few years after that. Yeah.
So your first experience was in Akita.
Yes, I've only lived in Akita. So I've had this very singular Japan experience of living in the rural north of Japan.
Had you always been interested in coming to Japan, or was this kind of throughout your studies, you're like, I want to try something new and see what's like somewhere else?
Yeah, I didn't have a specific interest in Japan, but right before I went to college, I was lucky that I went to China for the summer, and that really opened up my eyes. I grew up on the East Coast of America, and just going to China just blew my mind. So then I studied anthropology, and I focused on Asian studies, and I studied in Nepal. And during that time, I got quite interested in, at that time, Tibetan Buddhism. But I wanted to sort of explore other types of Buddhism. And during college, I found a Zen center and started learning about Zazen. So that's what brought me to Japan.
Oh, interesting. So you also had like a journey through different parts of Asia and before you came to Japan.
Yeah, I didn't think I would stay here, as many people have that similar experience. But I love Zen. I love the simplicity of it. I love the aesthetics of it. I love the philosophy of it. I love the inclusivity of it. And it just really resonated with me. And then, of course, I married a Zen priest, so it just sort of all came together and I settled down here.
When you moved to Japan for the first time after your experiences elsewhere in Asia, and especially arriving in Akita, which is much more rural, far away from big cities, I would say the largest known city would be Sapporo, that is quote unquote close by.
Right.
What was it like to move there?
Yeah, it's so rural there. And to your point, there's no big cities even nearby. You know, so it's one thing to be like an hour outside of Tokyo and it feels rural and there's rice fields, but I was like, wow, I'm really out here because I grew up outside of New York City. So it felt, in that sense, more extreme, you know? Like you're just so far from anything. And this was going back over 20 years ago. So even getting to Tokyo felt like a lot. So I loved it though. I loved it. I actually requested to be in a rural part of the country. I was surprised though, compared to other Asian countries, like just how strict everything is, how sort of high functioning everything is. So there was elements that felt sort of rigid to me, even in the rural elements. But given the farming and fishing community, it's just very much in tune with nature and seasons, which I really liked.
So you got a kind of pretty unique experience there, and nothing that can really be compared with if you had been a JET educator here in the Kansai area or in Tokyo. But you also had already this interest for Zen. So what did you came kind of searching for? Did you have an idea of, I want to try to explore temples and I want to maybe join a sort of Zen group, or did you have kind of something in mind already?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in Buddhism and Zazen specifically, which is the form of meditation in Zen. So, but, I was living in California before then. And so we have sort of these quasi hippie, zendos, and it's like these open places. And then you come here and you're looking for a Zen center or a place to meditate. And I couldn't even really find one. And then and now, of course, I've had this whole life with my husband, but the temples here are very different. They cater to their members. There's often not a lot of meditation going on. It's very ritualistic. And so it was really a different experience. Like I didn't find what I thought I was. I think what I was looking for was what I was experiencing in California, like the westernization of Zen. And so at first I was a little bit disappointed, but of course that's been rewarding to sort of lean into what's disappointing or lean into what was different than what you're expecting and why is it disappointing and what does this have to offer me. And of course there's tremendous history, and dignity that belongs to the culture of Zen here. So I've sort of learned to explore that and appreciate it and grow through it. So it was quite different than what I was expecting. Yeah.
You said that you met your husband, future husband, during your first year here as a jet teacher, and he's a Zen priest.
I know.
So can you tell me a little bit about how, you got involved with Dairyuji and involved with basically the handling of a temple in Oga Peninsula?
Right. It's sort of comical, but he had traveled around for several years. So he studied at Eiheiji, which is the main training monastery.
In Fukui Prefecture,
yes,
right? Yeah.
In Fukui Prefecture. He studied there for 3 years after college, and then he traveled around the world. So not only did he speak English, he had a really open mind, and he was just such an interesting person. So I didn't even meet him in the context of his temple. We just met at a party.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't like I'm looking for a Zen priest husband or something like that, but we met just in a social situation, and then it turned out that he was a priest. And I knew because he shaved his head and whatnot, and I had heard about him. But we just sort of met naturally. And then really my engagement with the temple comes after I married into the temple. And it was, pretty radical experience that we can talk about. But again, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I think sometimes it's good when you're naive because it was really hard. I had no idea what I was doing. It was very different than what I was expecting. So that was really more after we got married. I had visited the temple before we got married and all of that, but I wasn't really working there or doing any type of engaging outreach to the community through the temple.
I'm very curious. You mentioned you married into the temple, so to say, kind of married into the family that was running the temple. What are the procedures? How does this happen? Can anyone kind of marry into a temple? Do you have to pass certain, tests of knowledge of Zen or procedures to be kind of officialized as a member of this temple running family?
Yeah, there's no test or any qualification that you need. All of my Japanese friends who aren't, connected to a temple always tease me, say, we don't know anything about how to live at a temple. It's sort of this part of Japan that's very traditional, very conservative, that the average Japanese person doesn't know much about. And that always made me feel a little bit more relaxed. Like I don't know anything, but other people don't know anything. But anyone can marry into the temple. Now, whether or not people accept you, that's probably case by case. I felt that the community I married into was really welcoming. And it is marrying into a community. And people really know me as Dairyuji no Yome, like the bride of Dairyuji, which could sort of rub some Western people the wrong way. But that's how people see you. You're now part of Dairyuji, you're now the face of Dairyuji to a certain degree. But you don't need any certification. And what I love about Buddhism is that you don't need to prove that you're Buddhist. In fact, like my husband's parents, my in-laws and his extended family, nobody asked me, are you Buddhist? Do you believe in Buddhism? But almost all of my American family and friends asked me, are you Buddhist now? And it just really goes to show I grew up Catholic, that it's sort of this in-group, out-group, right? We tend to think of Japan as very in-group, out-group. But Buddhism is so open. It's almost like there's no dogma that you have to believe. There's no baptism. There are things you can do if you want to follow that path. That's fine, but you don't have to prove that. And I love that openness about it. So I faced zero sort of prejudice or resistance from my in-laws or community of like, well, you're not Buddhist, or are you Buddhist? There was just almost no questioning.
But that's an interesting point, because a few studies have been done by Japanese newspapers and such, asking Japanese people about their religious beliefs. Usually start with the question of, do you identify yourself as religious? And the vast majority, I think the number, and I may be wrong here, so maybe I'll forget the number, but the vast majority will say no, I don't identify as religious. But when they're being asked about their ritual practices, such as at the birth of a child, for weddings, for burials, funerals, for other life events, they will all follow them.
Yes.
They will all have a small altar at home after an elder passed away. And so a lot of Japanese people don't identify as religious, but follow religious practice. And I think that goes into what you were saying about Buddhism, at least in Japan, being a sort of more open kind of religious practice, rather than in what we see in the West as, are you in or out of it?
Absolutely. I agree with you. And it's sort of one of those things that you're unraveling as you live here. And the longer you live here, you're really curious about it, and you never really get to maybe a fulfilling answer. It's sort of this, how are people engaging with the religion or the spiritual lives? And I find Japanese people to be deeply spiritual, but they don't claim to be religious. And I find that really fascinating. And to be totally honest, you find that in Zen. I mean, if you were to meet my husband, he would not come off as like a highly religious person. In fact, it's almost, to embody Zen is just to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, but sort of go beyond the religion. It's how you live your life. He's not spewing dogma or sutras or anything like that. It's just living your life. So it's more of a philosophy that has elements of ritual and spirituality that overlap with other religions. So it's really quite different. And I think that's so fascinating for us to really explore. Yeah.
So back to the moment you kind of joined there, was there one specific ceremony that made you the bride of Dairyuji, that you had kind of went through, and then it was like an official thing?
We did have a big ceremony. So it was a wedding, and it was held at the temple. And I have photos, but I've like hidden them with like a key because they're so ridiculous. It's like I'm wearing the wig, the katsura, and it's very, very heavy. So it's like my head felt like a bobblehead, you know. And they put makeup on, sort of the white powder, sort of a little bit like a geisha, little bit white powder, really like shocking makeup. And then you wear 2 kimonos.
2?
Yeah, so you wear a white one, and then on top of that you wear a red one. It's very heavy. And the ceremony was at the temple. My father-in-law presided over it. And I don't know, there was, I guess, at least 400 people there. But I had no idea what was going on, if I'm totally honest. So that was sort of my entrance into the community to say, this is Gretchen. And actually my husband, this happens in Japan, you know, you have like a civil, it's not even a ceremony. Yeah, we were already married, and we actually had a wedding in America as well. So we were already married, but this was sort of the, welcoming me into the community and letting people know that I was now part of the temple and the community. Yeah.
Can you share then after what became your responsibilities as a representative of the temple? Do you have to do specific tasks? Are you now, is this basically like a full-time job now in terms of your life, and what do you do at the temple?
Okay, so I mean, the basic thing I do is whenever there's an event like a gyoji, I go and I help. So that could just be really basic things like setting up tables, cleaning up, serving food, welcoming guests, reaching out to different members for different reasons, supporting the priests. So some of our ceremonies, we might have 30 priests come. The bigger ceremonies, other priests come and help chant. I'll sort of help them set up or help them with anything they need. And so sometimes the preparation can go on for a long time, even if the event's only one day. Then we have the bigger ceremonies like Oban or Oshogatsu, which is, New Year's, and then the summer Buddhist holiday that are, more than one day, that can be quite time consuming. So it's sort of those big events I have to help out. That's really important. Because again, I'm representing the temple, and I do think it's important for the members to know that I'm there and I'm supporting the temple. I don't work at the temple on a daily basis. I could. So it's like each temple is different depending on how many people are there, how big the temple is. But I've decided not to work there on a daily basis, even though I'll probably be there on a weekly basis, because my mother-in-law is still healthy and young enough to do that, and she does it really, really well. And we also have one full-time staff. So I'll go there, though, if a big group of people are coming, or like I said, any of these other events. So I would say on average, at least once a month, we have an event that I help out with, sometimes a lot more. And then now I've shifted into doing other activities like running meditation retreats, workshops, or online groups that sort of are linked through mindfulness or philosophies of Buddhism, but they cater more of an inner spiritual element or for the English-speaking foreign community.
Do you then also have to take part yourself into, I don't know, religious practices and chants and meditations, or is it something that you can decide whether or not you do?
I guess I do take part now that I haven't even almost thought about that. But when we do have ceremonies, I do find myself participating and chanting the sutras and finding it really comforting, and I enjoy it. Yeah.
For me, it's hard to imagine like a temple. So it's a religious site and people come there for various reasons. But it's also a place that needs to be managed, right? You need to do maintenance of the building. You need to manage the events that you were. How many people work at a temple like this, and what's involved into running the temple?
I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, it's in a way, it's almost a business because each temple is its own unit. I can only compare it to how I grew up. I grew up Catholic. So each temple is sort of part of a larger diocese. But our temple is a Zen temple. It's part of the Soto Shu. So there's sort of an umbrella that we're part of. But our temple, at least financially, we're just 100% responsible. We're not getting any funds from the larger Soto Shu community. So then we are responsible, like you said, for maintaining, for the actual building, the actual gardens, that's a huge upkeep. And just all the finances. So actually right now there's, it's really just family. So it's an interesting how it's almost like a family business. So it's my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, my husband, and then one full-time staff. And my brother-in-law was working there, but unfortunately he passed away about 2 years ago. And then we have part-time workers with the gardens or with big events. But we have many, many local businesses that we collaborate with. So this sounds small, but if we have a big ceremony, we might need 100, 150 bentos. So we have probably 3 or 4 bento shops that we go to regularly, flower shops. If we have an event that needs acoustics, we have different companies that we work with. So you feel very connected to the community through all of these smaller businesses and sort of collaborations.
And so for all of those events, is it all based on kind of donations from the community and participants to organize and maintain the temple and kind of keep everything kind of running and available for everyone to come?
Well, we, for finances, it comes through the members. So they offer donations, and then any ceremony, they would pay for that. And then we do have a lot of non-Buddhist events at our temple. So we'll have music events or markets. Cool. We have art events. So we do a lot of that, and then we'll make money through that. Like we recently had an amazing taiko event, and about 150 people came. So that's some source of revenue. So that's how it comes.
So it's really more than just a religious place. It's like a community hall, basically, with a kind of religious background and surroundings. And
that was the original, point of a temple. Going back hundreds of years, there's been many different phases of Buddhism in Japan, but that it's meant to be a community center. And I think actually in the 20th century, it became a little bit hyper-focused on funerals, and now it's sort of shifting back to more community space. And one thing that I always admired about my husband is he really opened up the temple to the community, maybe more than other temples, and I loved that, So we'll have comedians come, or, again, musicians come, or artists come, and just sort of open it up, and anybody can come at that time and just enjoy the temple and enjoy whatever the event is. Yeah,
that's quite interesting because we may assume, and perhaps wrongly, that with the aging population of Japan and religion and temples being kind of associated with maybe a more conservative way of thinking, that the younger generation may not be so interested into going to those places. But they can be just as much as a museum or like an art space, a place for community and so on. So have you noticed this kind of maybe change where temples are trying to change what they're doing from just purely, let's say, religious rituals and practices to welcoming more like a younger generation by doing events and things like this?
Absolutely. And again, it's sort of case by case, but we know other temples that are doing that. And there has been the Japanese population, I think, got tired of paying for really expensive funerals, and and rightly so. And I really welcome that change, because even since I've been here, I noticed there's a big change. Like temples used to host these really big funerals, and now they go to like a funeral home, and it's really more streamlined. And I think that's fair, and I think it's important for temples to see what do the members need and meet those needs. And it seems to be moving away from these conservative traditional rituals. I think we should be careful not to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think rituals actually are important. That was something I learned from being here. But I think it is important to reach out to younger communities or younger generations, but also provide more communal space. If a temple is just about funerals, that's not sustainable. That's an important part of life. It really is. It's important to have that, but it has to be bigger than that. So I really welcome the change, because people are moving away from more of those traditional rituals and at least the expensiveness of them, right? And so my husband and I have really embraced that as an opportunity to shift and to change and hopefully meet the needs of not only our members, but the larger community. So yeah, we really welcome that. And we're always looking for new ways to let people know they can come to our temple and enjoy sort of that sacredness of it, or just the quietness of it, or the beauty of it in whatever way they need, that, so it could be through an art show, or just coming and getting a cup of coffee, or, whatever.
It really sounds like the community you've built there is thriving. But you said earlier that when you joined, you didn't know what you signed up for, and that it was kind of difficult at first. What were some of those big challenges that you kind of had to overcome to be where you are today?
It was very difficult, if I'm honest. I can be candid, because now I'm still here 20 years later. But it was just so difficult because I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't speak Japanese. I didn't really understand Japanese Buddhism. I didn't understand how important rituals were. I didn't understand, sort of like I had mentioned before, there's such a strictness to Japan that can feel confining at times. There's so many rules and right way to do it and wrong way to do it. And it just was a lot for me to take in. And I think, though, the one approach I had was just don't rush it. Like, I just thought I have to experience this. And so I was really, in a way, patient. I just sort of allowed myself to slowly learn. And I remember when I first went there and we would have these big ceremonies, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I thought, at least I can be warm and friendly. So I would like greet the members and ask them, how are you? Or how's your granddaughter? Or, it's nice weather. And it felt very simple, but little by little, you start to connect with people and you get to know them and they care about you. And then I really felt like people, trusted me and welcomed me and sort of started to see me as somebody who was part of the community. And sometimes in Japan, it just takes time. Like, oh, she's still here, and she's raising her kids and she hasn't left. And she, because I think there was some suspicion of like, is this going to go well?
A foreigner kind of coming in as a bride of the temple, right?
Yeah. So, but I think just me sticking around in a weird way, just keep showing up and keep caring and keep sort of learning. So there was sort of a long game in that sense. And I had to have, I think, a lot of patience. And there was this one time I'll share, because this was sort of a turning point for me, but it was probably a good 10 years after I had moved here. And I still didn't really know where I was going to fit in, right? I didn't really know into the temple. And I have children, so I was very busy with children, and I have, things I enjoy and friends, but I wasn't totally sure how I was going to fit into the temple. And it was during Obon, which is the Buddhist holiday where, the ancestors come back. The ancestors, the people who have passed on, come back. And it's a very important holiday in Japan. It's a Japanese Buddhist holiday. So this is actually unique to Japan. And it's about 4 days long. And it's a very, very busy time for the temple. And so before Obon, usually people go and they clean the tombs. So you have a family tombstone, right? Not individual, but it'll be like your family. And there's this one elderly couple who didn't have children. And they were getting older. And even in Akita, the summers are hot. Not as hot as Osaka.
Okay.
It's not as hot. I'm
Hard
not
to believe.
I know, I was going to say. But it's still hot. It's still humid. So let's say 30 degrees, which for you could probably feel
it's like
cool.
winter.
Yeah. But for me, it's hot. I mean, like I'm, all blotchy and red and hot and sweaty. But we have to go and clean many, many tombs before Obon because we have all the priest tombs and all the ancestors, even just for our family. And so we bring our kids there and it's summer and we're cleaning the tombs. And I if I'm totally honest, I didn't love doing that because like my American friends are all taking holidays, visiting national parks. I'm like, I'm cleaning tombstones. But this one elderly couple asked me, they said, could you clean our tombstone this year? We're just getting too old. It's too hot. It's like dangerous and we don't have any children. And I said, oh yeah, sure, I can clean it. And I went there. And I was watching my kids run around and play, and they're talking to their grandparents who are sharing stories. And then I start cleaning this couple's, tombstone. And they're big, if you've seen them, particularly maybe in Naka, they're quite big. It's almost like these granite slabs. It'll take almost an hour to clean, and it's so hot. And I started cleaning their tombstone, and I just was really overcome with this sense of meaning, how important it was for me as like the wife of the priest to really honor them and to watch over their ancestors and to give them a sense of ease that they're getting too old and they don't have children to do it, but that I would do it for them. And that again transcends culture, language, religion. And I also was really touched then that they asked me, because it's a real sign of like, you're one of us now, you belong to us.
No, of trust.
Yeah, and it really moved me. And that was a big shift for me. And it's such a small sort of mundane moment, but I started to think, oh, I have a purpose here. There's meaning for me. I want to take care of the members. I want them to feel that my husband and I really care for them and care for their ancestors. And so then you start to feel more and more like you belong, even in these really small, private moments. And then I could sort of show up feeling a little bit more like I belong here. I have something to offer. And that in a way was sort of foreshadowing maybe more the work I do now. That's more aligned with my interest and my deeper maybe calling, So yeah, that's when you start to feel like you really belong.
Because you also said about your calling that you initially came because you have this interest into Zazen, right? And so you came here looking maybe for some connection to Zazen, and unbeknownst to you, you met a Zen priest, you got married, you entered the temple life. But then it was difficult for 10 years until this turning point where you felt that you now belong here. What was it with your Zen kind of practice or search for Zen throughout that period? Was this also the moment where you're like, oh, this is kind of my way of Zen? Or were those things kind of evolving in parallel and kind of different up until the point that you now started doing those meditation retreats?
Yeah, so I think what I was surprised by the temples here is most people don't meditate, right? Most of the members don't meditate. That we didn't have a meditation class. And that was my whole image of Zen, was meditation. Because if you go to America, you're stripping it of like the cultural context, right? And so there's a Zendo or a Zen community and they just practice Zazen. And I found that so meaningful. So I was really surprised that it was missing. So I kept saying to my husband, like, shouldn't we offer meditation or Zazen? And he had, of course, done lots of meditation, but he didn't even have a daily meditation practice. So that was really curious to me. And so, once I started to feel more comfortable, I kept pushing my husband, why don't we do meditation? So we started to do weekly meditations. And then I kept pushing my husband, like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? And he's like, why don't you do this? And I was like, I guess I could. But for me, there's a hesitancy. I'm not a priest, and I really want to honor. I thought, well, I don't know if I could do that. But then I started to think, I really, really want to share this because meditation is so helpful for me, which I had sort of started meditating in college and I had maintained a practice. And I myself go on retreats and sort of explore different types of meditation, even though fundamentally I do either Zazen or mindfulness meditation, which is, there's a lot of similarities, but they're a little bit different. So then, then I actually did my training to become a mindfulness teacher. And then I started running retreats because I thought, I really want to share this with people. This was what I came to Japan for, and I didn't really find it. And I know there's places where you can do meditation, but at least not as many as I thought originally. So now we do more regular meditation just for the local community, but also we do the retreats for people who in English. So if people are wanting to see, because it's so amazing to go to Kyoto and see these beautiful temples, but they're not. Maybe it's nice to see the working temples and to have sort of that local culture element where you can sort of go in and talk to the priests and meditate there. So I really wanted to open up the temple even more for that. So that was, again, sort of why I came to Japan, what was really drawing me to Asia. And then I didn't really find it right away. And it was so highly ritualistic, right? But then, to my husband's point, why don't you bring that to the temple more, if that's what you feel like is missing? So then that's what I've been doing for like the past 7 or 8 years, is really offering more and more meditation and mindfulness at the temple.
So what goes into a retreat? What can people expect when they go to these kind of retreats?
Well, we only really do one retreat a year, which isn't that often. We do some private retreats, partly because of COVID, partly because actually I'm in graduate school right now. But we do a retreat every fall, which is a sleepover. So you would arrive on a Friday night. And Friday night, we would teach you the basics of Zazen. So I think Zazen and mindfulness are a little bit different. Zazen is more in keeping with the Zen tradition. So you sit on a black cushion called a zafu. You cross your legs. And there's a certain posture, and that posture sort of is important, and the breathing. And traditionally, you just look at a wall, but and your eyes are open. But we have a room where we look out to the garden. Just it's a beautiful garden, so it's just nice.
I can imagine it's more relaxing than the wall.
It's more relaxing than the wall, and we open if it's warm enough, we open up the doors so you can hear the frogs and just the birds and everything. And so Friday night, we'll just sort of teach you how to do that. Because again, we really want it to be inclusive and welcoming. I think sometimes these retreats can be intimidating, like you think you already have to be enlightened or know how to meditate, and that's just not the case. And of course, we embrace the whole beginner's mind, right, which is very famous, that even if you've been meditating for 20 years, you want to sort of embody that beginner's mind, that freshness of meditation. So I really just encourage people never to be intimidated by that first sit, That's actually a really beautiful moment. So Friday night, we just sort of introduce that, get to know each other, maybe have dinner together. And then mindfulness is more guided. It's a little bit less strict. So Zazen, you just sort of sit for 40 minutes with no instruction. And mindfulness is just, there's a little bit more of a guidance, or there might be like a topic, like emotions or thoughts or compassion. And so you can sort of weave that into the guided meditation. And I found, as much as I like Zazen, it's sort of a hard bridge to cross for people sometimes. That's why I thought pairing it with the mindfulness, you can just sort of guide people a little bit better. There's a little bit more talking. There's a reminder, return to your breath. And I find that helpful for myself as well as other people. But we also offer the Zazen, which is a little bit more strict. And so we sort of just introduce everything Friday night, get to know each other, share a meal, and then people actually sleep in rooms, on tatami. It's very comfortable. It's very beautiful. And then Saturday morning, my husband in his full, garbs, rings the bell. And we say 6 o'clock, which is not terribly early, but depending on if you're a morning person or not, some people,
early.
Exactly. I'm not a morning person, but I think at Eiheiji you get up at like 3 a.m. It's like middle of the night. So I think we ring the bell at 6, and then we start meditation at 6:30. And that's not, again, it's a very warm, relaxed atmosphere, but that's mostly in silence. So, you just come, you've already sort of at least learned a little bit the night before, so you know how to sit. And then my husband will guide you for the first few minutes, and then you have your morning sit. And then after that, we have breakfast. Then we'll do a tour of the temple, and we'll sort of explain the temple, explain all the altars, or there's different, sort of bells and chimes and, Buddha statues. So we'll just spend some time getting to know the temple, and then we'll have lunch. And then in the afternoon, I usually do like an activity, like a mindfulness activity. And I recently have been doing mandalas. So we'll do nice. I love doing creative. And then the mandalas, again, is a little bit more esoteric Buddhism, like Shingon or Tibetan. But I just find that it can be really helpful to get people out of their heads and just to give them sort of a activity to do. It's actually a really beautiful experience. So we'll do that, then have another meal together, and then we'll end with a meditation at night. And then we do Sunday as well, sort of same thing in the morning, like a proper sit, followed by a meal, followed by a couple of activities, lunch, and then more of a closing, time together.
I'm curious about the reasons people come for meditation, right? Mm-hmm. So you have meditation classes without retreats,
yes,
just with people that live in the area, but you also do the retreats in English where you have maybe foreigners that are coming. Do you notice any difference in interest in meditation from foreigners to Japanese, that the reasons for trying to practice or trying to learn are kind of different?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. That's so interesting. I just find the Japanese people who come to our meditation classes are just more private. And there's sort of this deep humility in Japanese people, it just feels a little bit more private. And I love the people who come on our retreats, but there's more of an eagerness to, learn. And, I've done this. So I don't know, there's just a level almost of engagement. There's just a more quiet privacy. The people who come to, let's say, our weekly local, just at the temple meditation for the community, they just come, we meditate together, and then they go, type of feeling,
In the West, I feel like, especially maybe in recent years, meditation as a sort of mindfulness practice to balance stress at work or manage emotions has become very popular and kind of commonly talked about even in public media and such. Is it the same in Japan? Is it kind of quote unquote advertised as a practice for managing your stress at work? Or is it still more linked with the traditional religious aspect of Zazen and maybe other types of meditation?
I think it's traditionally linked more with like Zen or Buddhism. But I myself and my husband have tried to say this is something you can practice to, give yourself some quiet moments or reduce stress, but I don't hear it talked about that much. And I find that, again, to your original question, that's so interesting. Japanese people may not say they're religious, right? But I would say that they've integrated elements of mindfulness so deeply into their culture, right? So like, for example, when Japanese people communicate, it's very slow because there's so much like mindful listening going on. I come from the East Coast, so I sort of always interrupt and cut people off, and I'm always jumping on people's words. And when I speak with Japanese people, there's so much respect for what I'm saying. And I'm like, oh, they're really listening to me, and they're taking it in, and they're being really mindful of this interpersonal engagement. And so sometimes I just think people don't think of themselves as religious, or maybe they're not going to go meditate because it's just quite integrated already into the culture. Right? And again, it's somewhat connected to all these rituals that sometimes feel very laborious to us, but there's a pausing and a respect and a dignity and a quieting, with all the many rituals that they do throughout the day. So I think that might be part of it.
When foreigners come and are very eager to practice and learn, do you sometimes notice certain misconceptions about what meditation is or should be about in the traditional sense?
I don't know. I mean, everyone who's ever come to our retreats have just been so incredibly lovely, and I feel like I learn a lot from them. So I don't know if there's any misconceptions. I think there's more an apprehension, if anything. I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to try, but I'm not going to be good. And it's like, you don't have to be good at all. You know what I mean? In fact, we're all horrible meditators. That's sort of the point. It's okay. So I would find more of an apprehension than any misconceptions. But yeah.
I mean, meditation is difficult, especially maybe what you shared before, the zazen, where you just sit in silence with yourself, focus on your breath, and you don't have anyone to guide you, and you're just left there. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to do a meditation retreat, a Vipassana meditation retreat in Myanmar, where the bell rings at 4 a.m., so quite early, and we go to the meditation hall for an hour and a half. Then we have an early breakfast, then we go back to the meditation hall for an hour and a half. Then we have an early lunch, which is the last meal of the day. And then we have a walking meditation, and then we have 3 hours in the meditation hall, and then another evening meditation. And just sitting there all day long, focusing on your breath. For me, it was, I want to use the word impossible because I'm not used to it. I think you need years of practice.
Yeah.
So this is apprehensive, right?
Yes.
Can we do this? Is this going to be that difficult?
Yes.
So what would be the easy way for people to overcome this and understand, like, it doesn't have to be this strict at first. How can you facilitate people kind of getting into meditation?
Yeah, I think that's such an incredible point to make. And it's a barrier to sort of learning how to do this. And the whole point, at least from my perspective, is to bring it into your daily life. So when you're sitting at a stoplight, you might have 30 seconds just to catch your breath. Or when you're having a conversation with somebody, you actually listen to them instead of just react to them. So for me, mindfulness or meditation, the goal isn't just to be a good meditator on the cushion. It's to sort of bring some spaciousness and clarity into your daily life. So even if you have 1 minute, right, just 1 minute a day, just, I would say, notice your body breathing itself 3 full cycles. Just bring your awareness to 3 cycles, like maybe when you wake up and when you go to bed, right? That could just be really opening up some spaciousness in your life. If you have 5 minutes, maybe just even lie down. I love lying meditation. I think there has to, so I went into like sort of that, I'm going to be this great meditator, and then you sort of deconstruct that and you sort of let go of all that structure. And I find that sometimes if I'm just lying on my bed for 5 minutes, I'll just do a meditation. That's for me meditating. It doesn't have to be in a zendo on a cushion for 40 minutes and your feet are, tingling, right? So I would just really welcome people to take 30 seconds, 1 minute. For me, following my breath is really important, and that traditionally is what people would call the anchor, but it isn't for everybody. That's another thing. Like, you have to just sort of start trusting yourself. And if you're like, gosh, I don't know how to follow my breath, I always say, like, touch, contact, like touch your hands and just feel that sensation and just keep bringing your awareness to that and just see what that feels like, that it's available to you at any moment. And that is something I like about Zen, is that it's life, right? It's the washing the dishes, it's, raking the garden. That being is focused. Yeah, right, just be focused in that moment. We're talking right now, just being focused in this conversation, or drinking or eating. And that's what I was saying before about, like, Japanese people, when they're talking with me, I think they're really present with me right now. There's not, at least, I don't know, maybe that's also a rural Oga thing, but I feel they're really present with me right now. They're really listening. They're not rushing me to answer. There's such a spaciousness in the conversation. So bring that into the conversations you're having with your family and your friends would be one way to sort of break down those barriers. And then if you sort of start to get more and more curious, maybe you could join a retreat. And our retreat, as you can tell, it's not super intense. It's really just to sort of invite people to experience it, see if they like it. Hopefully they can have some tools or little tips that they can, again, bring back into their daily life. So it wasn't as rigorous as yours. Yeah.
You said as well that what you're trying to achieve with your retreats is give space for people to process emotions, because this is also what mindfulness maybe is about, to kind of be conscious of your emotions. And you do the mandala for people to express themselves. And one of the emotions that you said you particularly focused on is grief.
Yeah.
So Can you tell us a little bit about how, as part of the temple work and the meditation retreats you're doing, you also started educating people on grief?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. So there's sort of a personal story. I think most people who work with grief, there's a reason. You've had a loss. And so sort of the origin story for me is when I was 5, my older brother died in a car accident. So my worldview was then informed by this horrible death. But at the same time, I was too young really to grieve it. And I started to adopt these narratives that weren't really healthy. And the narratives were, you don't understand death, or you don't remember him. And it just caused a lot of suffering, and I felt really disconnected, actually. And my parents were very warm, loving people, but I felt like they're over there grieving and they're not including me. And so I felt very disconnected, and it was confusing. And I sort of carried this, and it was very, very heavy. I never talked about my brother. I couldn't talk about him without sort of getting almost hysterical, because it was sort of a trauma experience because I was young. And then when my own son became the age my brother died, my oldest son was 17, it started just flooding back to me. And sometimes that happens if you have a loss when you reach their age or there's some parallel. And I saw my son. This is actually quite a beautiful moment. My son was 17 and my youngest daughter was 5. It's the exact same age difference, because I'm also the youngest of 4. I have 4 children. And I didn't even put this together, but I saw them walking hand in hand down a rice field. We were going to a festival, a matsuri. I was completely overwhelmed with this. I thought, I'm looking at myself and my brother. It just was such this beautiful moment. And that was the beginning of me re-grieving my brother. And sort of, some people feel uncomfortable, but for me, it was very healing. Some people feel uncomfortable with that word because there's no moment where you never miss the person. But I was able to start healing the wounds of that real terrible loss and that grief. And that took a long time, actually. It took many years. But my mindfulness or my meditation practice helped me so much, because really, really painful emotions are very hard to be with. Right? They're just, you don't want to be with them. So we tend to either, suppress them and then they come out all wonky sideways, or we really go really deep into it. So for example, with my parents, I had a lot of anger. Why didn't you include me in the grief? All these things. So, and I was sort of adding that anger and letting it get bigger and bigger when I was younger, because I wasn't, but with the mindfulness, it just sort of started to feel more spacious of, that was their experience. And that doesn't negate that I needed something that I didn't get. And then it could sort of start opening up an understanding for myself. I was able to reach out to my parents and really make sense of what we went through. And so for me, my meditation practice was so crucial in me being able to sit with my grief, even all these years later, decades later. And it just really helped me feel more connected to not only my brother, but my family and life. I mean, it was a really important time of my life and a really important sorrow to sort of start working through. And I was doing all sorts of things. And I actually kept talking to this woman, Sarah Furuya, who's a life coach. And I actually hired her as a life coach. I was doing retreats and I was doing some other things, and I wasn't sure how to make them work as well as I wanted to. And a lot of times when we would talk, I would talk about how I felt, wow, I'm really working through this grief. I feel lighter. I feel more connected. This is so important. And then COVID hit. And then I'm giving you the long version. I'm sorry, I'm sort of going on it, but yeah.
I'm just listening.
But I was sort of really feeling like, wow, that alchemy of, when you turn pain, real pain, into something sort of beautiful. That's what was happening to me through my brother's loss and really grieving that. And I was sharing that a lot with Sarah. And then unfortunately, my cousin died, and it was sort of sudden in America. This was during COVID. And so, we couldn't go home as foreigners. Like, you weren't allowed to, and they didn't even have a funeral. It was just such a wild, horrible thing to experience. But what had happened is, because I had really leaned into the grief of my brother, my cousin died August 2nd, right before Obon. And I was just in this very liminal space, like in Irish Celtic mysticism, it's sort of a thin place. I felt like the space between the living world and the dead world, it was Oban, was like, you know, like transparent. And I just felt very much in line with my grief at that time from my cousin. It felt very sacred and very spiritual. And I really participated in Oban, like putting up the altars, putting up the different symbolisms, and my husband chanted. And it was a very beautiful, deep, sacred experience. And then I thought, wow, was such a beautiful, horrible experience, because I lost this cousin who I was quite close with. But I felt that I was able to be present with my grief, right? And so then Sarah kept saying, wow, this is important to you. And she's a life coach. And then she's like, maybe you should start, you know, helping other people. And so Sarah and I together, and then I did do training. I did go back and do really wonderful training with a man called David Kessler. And then we created a grief support group. And the initial idea was for other foreigners in Japan, because you start hearing, oh, my mom died, my father died, I couldn't go home during COVID. And you're unable to go home, which is a horrible experience. Maybe you can go home, but then you come back and your life is so different here. Or maybe you don't have access to your own cultural context for whatever religion or culture you came to, right? You're sort of missing that community or that, you know, support network. So it sort of started out that way, but we've also had people from other countries join us. But we made it online because it started during COVID. But then I felt I was very reluctant to do anything online. But COVID was, again, the silver lining is you just had to figure out a way. And here I am way up in Oga, very, you know, rural. And now it just opened up my world so much. And so a lot of people were based in Japan, but Australia, China, America as well. And so we just started this grief support community. But sort of the main principles are mindfulness. And I only use the word mindfulness in allowing yourself to be present with all the emotions that come up with grief, right? So again, you don't have to even want to meditate, but that idea of, you know, sitting with really painful emotions is hard, right? But sort of learning how to do that and being really thoughtful about it. So mindfulness, and then community, the importance of having your grief and your sorrow witnessed is very profound. Somebody really listening to you, somebody really witnessing your loss, your grief is really profound. And I think we've sort of lost that, you know, that's what community is, and how important that is to listen to one another and really witness that and be witnessed. And it's not a one and done, it's sort of over and over, you know. And then the third thing is rituals. Sort of this idea that I learned from the temple is rituals are sort of these space holders, you know. Like it just sort of, in a weird way, takes the pressure off of you. So it's like, if once a year you want to bake, you know, like my cousin's favorite cake, there's something really comforting about that. Or setting up their pictures or lighting candles. I think it's just nice, you know, to have some rituals that connect us to our ancestors or the people we're grieving. So those are sort of the main sort of components. But it's a 6 month. We sort of joined for 6 months. So there's a lot of time, you know. Grief is not an easy thing. You know, you need a lot of time to get to know each other and feel supported and comfortable. And then after 6 months, you can join again. And at least more than half the people join again. Because again, you want a place where you can go and you can talk about your grief, and it's changing and you're changing, and there's all these ripple effects of your grief. Other relationships change. Sometimes people have to move or your finances change. So there's just so much that goes with it. But to your point, the intensity of the emotions that come up with grief are pretty significant. You know, they're big, they're heavy. And I really want to have a space where people feel like, okay, I can sit with this grief and feel safe, and I can be with it. Because then, you know, I don't know the right word. It's really hard to talk about these big things, but it's like, if you can sit with the grief, there's also a lot of love, right? We talk about that, like the pain and the joy, the pain and the love coexist. But if you sort of deny the pain, you're also sort of denying the love and the connection. And that's how I felt with my brother. I felt very disconnected from him. It's like you sever it, the good and the bad.
during COVID, then you started this online group to kind of give foreigners an opportunity to deal with their grief.
Yeah.
Is it something now that you've also brought back in person at the temple and that you maybe do with the local community as well?
So I want to do that. And that's something I've been thinking to do. And my husband and I are constantly collaborating. So we're always sharing. So my husband does a lot of work with the local community around grief. And he's been doing that for a long time. He's actually like a chaplain as well. So he does hospice work, and he does different groups. So in a weird way, like through him, sometimes I go to some of the groups and I've shared a lot of what I've learned and what I've created. But myself, no, I haven't done it. But I'm going to do a grief retreat. So the people who are part of this community then can come to the temple and do. So in addition, we have like a once a year right now, open to public, just sort of a generic mindfulness retreat. But then I do specialized retreats for like grief or private retreats for different reasons. So, but it is something I'd like to do.
Have you noticed then from your work at the temple as well, you mentioned you were cleaning the tombs of this old couple for Obon, that in Japan maybe there's a different understanding of grief, a different way to process it than what you've seen with maybe the foreign community?
Yes. Well, again, I would say it's so much about the rituals. And again, when I first came here, I thought, wow, there's so many rituals, right? Because I'm American, so it's all psychology. You know, we talk. And here it's just rituals. But then I started to realize, again, these rituals sort of brought people together, right? So if you have a hoji, like a memorial service, my normal reaction would be like, oh, I don't want to go to that. Like, that's just me. I don't love those type of things. But then you go there, and because I'm at the temple and I'm helping, and I'm usually just sort of sitting, I hear them sharing stories about their grandma, and sometimes they're funny stories. And then like the little kids can hear stories about the grandma that maybe they didn't even meet, you know, things like that. And I started to see how this is a very deep wisdom in that, right? You bringing people together regularly, you know, like after 1 year, after 7 years, after, you know, like, and so there's like these place markers of getting people together, looking at their pictures, sharing stories. And there is a lot of talking and sharing in that, but they don't talk so much about, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but what my experience is, you don't talk so much about your personal sorrow or sadness, right? There's just less willingness to share that.
So you focus on remembering the person, on sharing the stories of the person, and putting the focus kind of away from you,
and sort of using these rituals as a reason to share the stories. And so, as I mentioned before, my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, died. And so we've had quite a few memorial services, and he loved to drink beer, you know. And so we always like do a little kanpai to him when we're having a hoji, and we have like a bento, and it's just it's just a cute way in a really sad experience to be like, oh, he loved beer, we're all going to have a beer, and we kanpai to him. Where maybe if we didn't have that memorial service, there wasn't a way to sort of talk about that. Like, it sort of lends itself to getting together and talking about that person. So it's more of an outward expression. Sort of, let's do a beer kanpai, but we're not going to talk about our emotions so much on a regular day. Yeah. But I like I said, my husband and I collaborate a lot. So I think he's trying to bring some of what I've learned, or maybe more of my Western, like, you know, mentality into some elements of some of the groups he runs or some of the work he does as well. So I think we can learn from one another, you know.
Kind of share both approaches.
I hope so.
And
yeah.
Take the best of each.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
If there's one thing that you'd like people to know about grief, and if someone listening to this is dealing with grief, or maybe not even realizing they're dealing with grief, what will be the one thing that you'd like them to know?
Well, I guess if it's one thing, I would just say you're not alone, right? Like, just, you feel so alone in your grief, and it shatters you. You know, it's shattering. Just to know that you're not alone. And I guess that's it. And then I would say if you know someone who's grieving, you know, just allow space for them, show up for them. Don't try to fix it. People are very uncomfortable when other people are suffering, right?
Yes.
I mean, I see people's faces like freeze, just let that person show up however they want to be, even if it's really messy and it's uncomfortable for you. Just give them the respect to grieve in their own way, and don't try to fix them, because there's this sense of like rushing people through grief and you'll be okay. And just, you don't need to fix anything. And I guess, like I said before, like the pain you're feeling is because there was so much love, right? And just really make sure that you lean into that love and that connection. But grief is hard. Grief is really hard. Yeah.
So if someone listening to this is grieving or wants maybe support, they can find you and the group you've created.
Yeah, we have two. I'll just say this quick. We have a group that meets. We have Zoom calls and we have like interaction. But I did this because I thought not everyone's comfortable talking about their grief, or maybe it just doesn't work with their schedule. So we have an online program. You'll probably put in your show notes. So it's on our website. It's called Evergreen. So the group that we meet is called Lighthouse Circle. And then the group it's completely self-paced, but it has amazing content. It has videos that I've created along with Sarah. And then I do meditations that you can listen to. And there's sort of different topics, and they're just sort of jumping off topics. So like remembering the person you've lost, or how to take care of yourself during grief, how to be with the difficult emotions, how to sort of integrate it. And then it's completely self-paced. So that's available to anybody. Like even today, you could join that. And then I encourage people, like, do it with a friend or do it with a family member if they're grieving as well. Like, it really is meant to be a resource because, again, I believe that it's helpful to have someone else witness you. Mm-hmm. But even if you just really need a private space to grieve, I really think it's a beautiful place. And then also just know I'm on the other side. Like, I'm always available. There's a group of people that at the end of every meeting, we say metta, which is, you probably know the word. It's a Pali word, like from, Buddha's time, but it's loving kindness. And I always sort of say a prayer for everyone who's grieving. So just sort of know that there's people out there that are wanting to support you. And there's even other resources on our website. Yeah.
20 years working at the temple, being the bride of the temple. Looking back on your experience now, has your perspective on Japan, your experience of life here changed?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's such a big question, but I'm so glad that I've sort of stayed. Do you know what I mean? When you're here for a long time, there's moments where I thought this is hard for me or I want to go back. But I also feel, like I was saying before, that patience. And I feel like really slowing down and being patient and letting the culture teach me, and letting this community mirror back to me a sense of love and belonging has then really allowed me to sort of find this deeper purpose, this meaning, and I know people feel uncomfortable around grief, but it's like when you're grieving, you need that support. So then I just feel just a tremendous sense of gratitude and happiness that I'm here and that I've had this opportunity to find this.
Do you have any upcoming plans with the temple? Any big events you want to do? Any new experiments or? Oh,
yeah. Well, please check out our website because we do a lot of fun events. And like we've done shamisen and we're doing some taiko events. So if anyone's curious, I don't have anything right now because I'm actually finishing up my graduate degree. Mm-hmm. So I've sort of cleared my schedule because I have some papers to write, a thesis. But starting in the fall, we'll do retreats. And one thing that I really want to do is a cafe. Because I love to bake.
Cafe.
Yeah,
nice.
And I love to bake. And again, it's just about letting people know you're welcome in the temple. You don't need a reason to come. You can just come. And I really want to offer that. There's such a deep sense of a sense of deep time, a sense of quiet, a sense of spirituality and sacredness that I just want to invite people. So I'm hoping to start a cafe soon and do more and more workshops. So once I finish my degree, I want to sort of put my energy into doing more. And it's been exciting now that, people are traveling more and opening up more.
Back.
So many people, and people are getting more comfortable going to places like Akita and really being adventurous with that. So yeah, I'm excited. So starting in the fall. I'll be doing more and more
That
workshops.
sounds very exciting, and
Yeah.
probably interesting news to follow, and maybe a trip to Oga Peninsula to plan.
You're always welcome to come, please. It's beautiful too.
Covered quite a lot of topics today, from your journey to Japan, working at a temple, meditation, and grief. Do you feel like there's something we didn't get a chance to talk about that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I mean, just if you are living in Japan or traveling through Japan, I would just encourage people to go to the off the beaten path.
Off the beaten path.
Yeah, just go explore different parts of Japan. And even if it doesn't meet your expectations, you sort of get to interact with local people. And the people where I live are really salt of the earth. So our temple is the big dragon temple, Dairyuji. And dragons are sort of the gods of water, the oceans. And it protects the farmers and it protects the fishermen. And I just find the people there to be incredibly resilient, hardworking, warm, really gruff,
The
really
north
strong.
of Japan.
Yes, this is like there's a gruffness to it, and I just really love the people there. And so just really encourage people to sort of explore different parts of Japan, get to know local people, just keep an open mind. Yeah.
Be patient.
Be patient. Yeah. I will say that I feel like living a slow life is a meaningful life, for me at least. So yeah, allow some space in your life, slow down, take a few moments to breathe every day. Yeah.
Thank you very much for
thank
coming,
you.
Gretchen. Thank you for sharing your stories, which were very interesting. And we'll link, of course, to your temple so people can find even more information and maybe reach out if they have specific questions for you and want to plan a trip to Akita.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been a lovely conversation.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we will be back again next week. Bye. Are you looking for another podcast episode to listen to next? If you like the one you just listened to, I'm sure you'll also enjoy the one that I've selected and linked in the description down below. Go check it out.